Okay, hello everyone. My name is Antonio Duran. My pronouns are he, him, his. And I am excited to welcome you all to the Demystifying the Research Process for Higher Education Graduate Students webinar, co-hosted by JCSHESA, the Journal of Critical Scholarship and Higher Education and Student Affairs, and NASPA's New Professional and Graduate Students Knowledge Community. Today we will be featuring four wonderful panelists who will share their perspectives on what it looks like to engage in research as higher education graduate students. And so some quick notes for this process will be given by Ashley Brown, who is co-hosting this webinar with me.
Brown, she, her, hers, and I'm a doctoral student at Loyola University.
That would be dope.
So again, we want to extend our gratitude to our four doctoral student panelists, Alex C. Lang, Jamila Lee Johnson, Stefan Santa Ramirez, and Vanessa Na, who are here with us to share their research experiences and what they've learned along the way. And before we get started, we just have a couple notes to share with you all. Our conversation today will be guided by the questions that attendees submitted when they registered for the webinar. So, but please feel free to ask any additional questions that you have throughout the webinar experience. You can use the chat function that's at the bottom of your screen to do that. And those questions will only be visible to us as hosts. So we will be monitoring those and we'll do our best to get to them. And also, if you could just double check that your audio and video stays muted throughout the webinar, that would be great. And we just want to make sure we have as little background noise as possible during the panel. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So Alex, Jamila, Stefan, and Vanessa, can you please briefly introduce yourselves and describe your involvement with research as a graduate student?
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Lang. My pronouns are they, them, and their. I'm a second-year PhD student at the University of Iowa in the Higher Education and Student Affairs program, pursuing a graduate certificate as well in gender, women, and sexuality studies. My current and most likely dissertation research is about examining anti-racist attitudes in queer, trans, disability, and faith communities. In terms of like my research trajectory as a graduate student, I actually started in my master's program when I was at the University of Georgia. After my research design course or research methods course that we take in the master's program at UGA, one of our faculty members, Candace Moore, took a chance on me and said, yeah, let's do your study. And from there, we got that IRB study approved by IRB, and really had the fortunate experience of getting part of that study published in the Journal of College Student Development. From there, when I worked full-time at Michigan State University, I was, again, thankfully brought on to a study by Dr. Chris Wren, and at the same time brought on to a study about student activisms with Drs. Chris Linder and Stephen John Quay. And now at the University of Iowa, I study primarily with my advisor, Dr. Jody Lindley. So really interested in and looking forward to talking about those experiences here today with my fellow panelists.
My apologies, I lost the screen. My name is Jamila Lee Johnson, and I am a fifth-year doctoral candidate at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. My research interests broadly lie in the interest of Black women in higher education. However, my dissertation focuses on the experiences of undergraduate Black women at historically Black colleges and universities and elected student leadership positions. So SGA presidents, class presidents, and HBCUs are unique in the factor where they have campus queens and they also have campus kings. And so currently my research experience, I am currently on my advisor's research team. And while she is out on sabbatical, I actually have the opportunity to manage the research team where I work with 3 graduate students, as well as one undergraduate student, and mentoring them on what it's like to be an undergraduate student and actually just getting the experience of what is it like to be on a research team.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Stefan Sansa Ramirez. I am a third-year PhD candidate at Arizona State University in the Educational Policy and Evaluation Program, and I am also pursuing a graduate certificate in socioeconomic justice through the School of Social Transformation, also at ASU. My interest more broadly focuses on the experiences and support systems for first-gen Latinx students. My dissertation research is on the anti-immigration policy effects and the everyday experiences of Latinx undocumented and documented students at a predominantly white institution. I'm doing a critical ethnographic case study for my dissertation. I also do research that focuses on the experiences of full-time PhD Latinx students with faculty of color as mentors and advisors. Oh, and I'm also a research assistant, and like Jamila, managing a team of about 5 research assistants on a project focused on the experiences of Muslim students at different institutions in Arizona.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here and joining us for this webinar. Also, thanks to Ashley and Antonio for helping to organize all of us together. My name is Vanessa, she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm a PhD student at the University of California, San Diego, in the Transforming Education for a Diverse Society program. In terms of research interests, I'm broadly interested in the educational experiences of Asian American students, but more specifically, Southeast Asian American students and the experiences they bring with them as children of refugees. So I care a lot about intergenerational resilience and the knowledge that they bring. The other prong that I focus on are how transformation occurs on campuses as a result of students of color engage in racial justice. There's a lot of research on the individual actions that student activists take, which is very important. But I'm really interested at learning or looking how their work serves as a catalyst for systemic transformation on campuses. In terms of the research experience I've had, all of the research experience I have had has been collective because I really deeply care about working with other people for research. I intend to remain engaged in collective community research. I'm lucky to be a part of the research team for the National Institute for Transformation Equity, aka NITE. Shout out to some people on call because I see some NITE researchers on here too. And also shout out to my Southeast Asian American Scholar Collective that I'm fortunate to engage in research with as well.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for those introductions. As you all can see, we have a wide variety of research interests and experience represented within our panelists. And so I'm excited to hear what insights they will offer. So as mentioned by Ashley at the beginning of the webinar, we received questions from people and have offered those questions to our panelists. Though we might not get to each specific question throughout this webinar, we do ask the panelists to possibly touch upon some of the sub-questions when we set them ahead of time. So this next question is all about an introduction to research. So if a graduate student is interested in getting involved in research, what should they be thinking about? What advice do you have for starting that process? And in answering this question, you might also consider giving some insights on what was your process in narrowing down your research interests or your research agenda.
I can start off answering that question. And I would say for me, when I first got to school, I was scared. I was intimidated by the word research and what exactly does that mean. For years, I was a practitioner, so I always knew, I thought of things from like a practitioner base. And I was wondering like, oh, what do I do? And actually, I was offered a research assistantship when I first got to school. And I was really nervous. And like, I think sometimes we've gotten a little bit beyond that, but we think of like research, singing in a lab and things like that. And that's not necessarily what that means for education. So for me, I'm a visual learner. And one of the things that I did was I sat down with my faculty advisor and did like a vision board of things of what that I felt like I wanted to accomplish while I was in graduate school, as well as where my research interests kind of fell into those areas. So one of the things that advice that I would have is to definitely, suggestions that I would have for advice would be to definitely have a conversation with your advisor around like what your interests are, and they would be possibly able to connect you with, oh, I may not be able to do research in that area, but I may know someone who's actually doing that may have a spot, or for you on their research team, maybe you can do some interviews or just even get the experiencing of sitting in on those interviews. And that was actually very helpful for me. I spent the first semester almost like shadowing what she was doing in her current project, and that kind of helped me develop what my research interests were. I will say this. I started off broadly with saying that my research interest is in the experiences of Black women overall in higher education, which is true. And it actually was not until I attended, it's entitled Sisters of the Academy, which is known as SOTA. It's a research intensive boot camp a week for Black women, but also other women of color. And that's where I really narrowed down my research interest in the topic of what I wanted to do. So I hope that answers the question, but I would definitely say reach out to your faculty advisor. Also reach out to other members in your department, because they may also have some ideas, or another department on campus where someone is actually possibly doing similar work to what you're interested in doing. It may not be education related, but it may be out of like the School of Social Work, or we have a School of Humanities. And so that's what I would say.
I think to add, to really nail the point home, to be involved in research, you've got to let people know you're interested in doing research. And so, like, whether that is your advisor or somebody else was really critical, right? So my master's program, at least, the UGA CSHESA master's program is highly geared towards creating really informed practitioners, but there's not really much room for master students. It's not a program master students go to do research, right? And so in many ways, I had to really be intentional about saying, I really want to do this. And I was really open to what it was. It could have been just sitting on our research team meetings and listening. It could have been pulling literature for folks. It was about sort of just making myself available to the process. That was really important. If you have much more specific interests, I think, as my colleague has just shared, right, like you've got to go to those folks and do some more targeted asks that I think are really important. I think the other thing too that I imagine will happen in our conversation today is I think when we evoke the word research, we often mean empirical research, and we often mean like something that has to neatly fit into interview-based research or statistical methods, where I would really also emphasize that there are other methodologies of research that are still very rigorous, yet differently accessible than those two sort of primary bodies of research that we think of as research. So just want to throw that in as well.
Yeah, I wanted to add to the great advice folks have already provided, but I also suggest tapping into advanced graduate students. A lot of the research methods that I've learned and processes I've learned have been from incredible graduate students who have served as my mentors. So while my faculty advisor is fantastic, I've found a lot of community and support, because research can also be frustrating and time consuming and draining. They've been able to help me not just through the research process, but all the emotional processes that come with it as well. So definitely reach out to and work with other graduate students.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. For attendees who have recently joined us, we just want to send out a reminder that feel free to ask any questions throughout the webinar. So if a panelist shares something and that triggers something in your mind of a question you would like to ask, you can use that chat function, and we'll be taking a look at that and trying to weave any additional questions in as well. But kind of moving in this direction of pursuing independent research, and some of you have already touched on that, can you talk a little bit about that process for pursuing independent research, or how students can build relationships and collaborate with faculty from other institutions or recent graduates, and also potentially experience that you have with seeking funding for research projects?
Yeah, I can definitely start with this question. So I think I've been very fortunate to have an incredibly supportive advisor. I work with Dr. Sam Useus, and I've been connected to him since my master's program, and I've worked with him ever since. And he has always taken the time to have conversations with me about my research, provide me with resources about my research. But he's also incredibly supportive of me seeking other resources for my research too. In particular, to provide an example of what it could potentially look like to pursue your own independent research interests, I care deeply about Southeast Asian American students. There aren't very many Southeast Asian American scholars. If I wanted to find a Southeast Asian American higher education faculty member, it would be very difficult and potentially impossible at this point. So instead, I reached out to other graduate students across the nation, and we were able to form a Southeast Asian American Scholar Collective. And we've been able to grow since then. But together, we talked about what's missing in our research, like what stories aren't being listened to. And from there, we started cultivating our own research projects. We have a collaborative autoethnography that hopefully will be coming out soon, because we realized that our stories weren't being told, so we needed to tell them. I think that, I think one of the common types of advice that are often given about connecting with other faculty is to email them, go to conferences, etc. But I will definitely say that I'm a horrible networker. I don't like going to conferences and exchanging business cards and shaking hands with people. To me, that doesn't feel comfortable. So I often rely on my network to introduce me to other people. And to me, that feels more authentic because there's an actual relationship being built. So if I know that one of my awesome sisters is doing research about Southeast Asian American students, I'll ask them if they know other people and then connect to them that way. Go out to a group collective dinner rather than a one-on-one dinner, and start having conversations then. So it is about connections, but I think that there are a lot of different ways to make connections than the traditional, like go to a conference, exchange business cards type of connection.
I can add to that. Thank you, Vanessa. I also, like Vanessa, have been very fortunate to have amazing support from faculty mentors and advisors. But when I first got into my doctoral program, my assigned faculty advisor did not do anything higher ed related. So it was a bit challenging at first. Amazing mentor, amazing individual. And her name is Dr. Margarita Jimenez Silva, who's currently at UC Davis, running a teacher ed program there. But I shared with her my interest from day one of what I wanted to do independently, outside of her own research agenda, and understanding that I wanted to support her and her agenda as well. She was very supportive and said, and was really honest, like, I don't do this work, obviously, but let's get you connected to folks who do that work, or I can just help you along the process in regards to like methodology. But you can take the lead on like the population, because I've done research at Michigan State as a master's student, more specifically in Dr. Chris's Ren's class that Alex mentioned a bit ago. So I already was introduced to research projects. So coming into it, I just needed the support, like, I need you to sign off on my RB so I can actually just implement this on my own, which we did, right? So I did a study my first semester in my doc program under her direction, in regards to supporting me with methodology, but I took the lead on the project, and I actually presented it at a regional education-based conference in Arizona that December. So I started the project like September and did a poster presentation by December. So that was my first semester in my grad program. But also I think I also talked to other faculty members at my institution that were doing similar work to mine, and got on a research team my first year, and build relations and rapport, and got to learn a lot about the process of research studies, more or less qualitative research. That's my niche. Yeah, so that building that relationship with that specific faculty member and getting on his research team was a great leadway into me becoming one of his advisees when my faculty advisor at the time decided to go to UC Davis for work. So now I'm under the direction of Dr. Keon McGuire, who I've been working with since day one on his research team since I got here. So I would say, like other folks, you have to say it out loud what you want to do, right? Or else people would just assume that you're just here to work on their projects. And then I take the initiative to go out and just do it. So tell folks what I want and how can I make this happen, and can I have your support in making that happen? And that's worked for me thus far.
Wonderful. Anything else to add from the other panelists at this time? No? Okay. Well, the next question that we have is about a common concern that I think a lot of us face in the academy, and it's oftentimes around feelings of the imposter syndrome or not being like a quote unquote real scholar. So the next question is all about, at what point did you feel like a real scholar who was growing in your areas of expertise and felt like you had something to contribute to the scholarly dialogue? And what contributed to those feelings of feeling like you could contribute to the scholarly dialogue?
I can start here. And I would say, yes, imposter syndrome is real every day. And I think it wasn't until the end of my second year, which was actually this past May, I presented some preliminary findings on a research study that I've been working on the experiences with receiving mentorship from faculty of color for full-time Latinx PhD students. And I presented at NCORE, which is the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity and Higher Education. Sorry, I have invisible liners in my mouth, so I have like a sip because I can't even say the term because of my liners. So I apologize if I'm not as clear. And anyway, I think being in that space, being able to present my preliminary findings and getting affirmations and validation from the audience members of the importance of this research and how they appreciated the design that I decided to utilize, which actually follows the CC model from Sam Ysaya's that Vanessa was mentioning as her advisor. And I think that was the first time that I actually was like, you know what, I don't feel like I'm faking it till I make it. And that was at the end of my second year. And I think even as a third year candidate now, I'm a lot more confident in my abilities to talk about my research and why I've chosen certain methods and methodology. But it wasn't until that moment where people in the audience actually was like, you know what, that works. That's my experience. No one's talking about it. We need more of this. And I appreciate you doing it. That's when I was like, you know what, this is why I decided to go to a PhD program. So yeah, that's a little bit of my moments.
I can go next. Similar to Stefan, it was for me this spring. It was actually after I defended my dissertation proposal, where I was like, oh, maybe I do know what I'm talking about. But also, I think it was confirmed. It was confirmed for me too when I was doing data collection and just listening to the experiences of my participants, and even like one of my participants' parents. So in the middle of like, I'm Skyping one of my participants, and at the end, she's like, my mom wants to speak to you. And I was like, okay. And her mom was like, oh, I just think that I was sitting here like listening to these questions and listening to her answer them. And I thought that they were so great. And I was just like, oh, well, maybe I am a scholar. But also it ends up being that her mom is like in a second year PhD program too. So she was just like getting ideas from that. So for me, it's a daily process, right? Like I still struggle often sometimes with like seeing myself as a scholar, um, or even thinking about like an activist and what I'm wanting to fight for. So for me, it's a daily struggle.
I'll also chime in here. I was joking with my co-panelists before that like tomorrow is my counseling appointment, and once again it will be a topic like this very question of like, who am I? What am I doing here? Um, and I think for me, there was a moment when I was working professionally that I thought about like feelings of being an imposter very differently, where I thought about like as someone who really believes in environmental theories of development, that there are environments that make me feel more like an imposter than others. And so I want to spend time in more like generous places that build me up rather than these like performative spaces of academia that are often based in like who's more right than the other, who can cite things more than the other person, and sort of rattle them off. And so I think similar to both Stefan and Jamila has been like finding people who have helped like not just boost me because they like me, but like able to remind me of who I am when I'm not in those very performative spaces, that have been really key. And I would say like it's still a journey. Like I think it's as someone who also really aligns with more post-structural and critical paradigms, there's like no endpoint of being a scholar, but it's like there are days where I feel much more like a scholar than I do others. That has really informed the way that I think about like combating imposter feelings and conditions, um, than others.
Yeah, I wanted to add to this as well. I really appreciated this question because this is a question I ask myself maybe every single second. I don't feel like a real scholar, and I've come to accept that I likely never will because of the way the academy is created. But I think my time has really been spent towards understanding that that's okay, that I don't feel like that, and that I may not feel like that. And I think that uncertainty for me is really important and keeps me grounded, because I know I'm here for my community, and I believe that if at some point I feel comfortable with being a part of the academy, I've drifted from my original purpose of being here. Because at the end of the day, I'm here for my community. I think a lot about what my role is as a researcher, and there's this idea of creating new knowledge as a researcher, but I really think that it's my responsibility and duty not to create new knowledge, but to listen and serve as a translator for the knowledge my community has always had. And I think that as long as I stay rooted in this idea that I'm a manifestation of the ancestral and community knowledge, and that my community has entrusted me with this valuable knowledge, then it doesn't matter to me whether or not I'm seen as a scholar. Because at the end of the day, if I can present at a student conference and translate these theoretical concepts in ways that my community understands, that is what feels right to me. It's not about being a scholar to me. It's about what is valuable to my community and what can be useful to my community.
Thank you all. I really appreciate what each of you shared, and there are pieces from each of your stories that I can relate to, and I'm sure many of us can. It's a nice reminder that we are not alone in these feelings and that we can support one another with that. So thank you. So next question is moving in a little bit of a different direction, and I know a few of you have shared about your experiences disseminating your research and research findings in different areas. And so thinking about the publication process, can you share some strategies that you've learned along the way around publishing, and what your experience has been so far with publication.
Yeah, I'm glad to start on this one. So, in terms of like formal peer-reviewed academic article publication, I think Vanessa said this earlier. For me, research is so collaborative that I have been very fortunate to not go that process alone quite yet. And so it's been really, I've been really grateful to have either advisors or mentors along the way who have helped in that process, and I'll also let me like lead that process of publication, not just sort of like them doing it and me watching kind of thing. So I think that if we're gonna be real for a second, and we can be real for more than a second,
I think that one of the most painful part of the publication process is the waiting. Like, you will submit, depending on where you submit, especially if you're submitting to a top tier journal in any field, you will be waiting to first get a notification that they got it and that it's under review, and then more notifications that it's moving through the review process. And so I think, I think part of the reason JCSHESA is co-sponsoring this webinar is that they have really dedicated themselves to a very timely process on purpose, right? That didn't appear in a vacuum. That was a response to a greater culture of waiting in terms of publication. So my experience has been publishing sort of empirical work in journals, but also like publishing in practitioner-based newsletters and in some different organizations' websites as a means of like getting some really early analysis and work out there that I think, as all of my co-panelists have said, all of us are sort of here for our communities and other communities as well. And it's more important that this work gets out there sooner rather than waiting for some publication process. Yet we know, for legitimacy's sake and other things, that those components are really important. So it's a both and of like doing sort of the empirical journal-based work, but also doing the community-based engagement work, I think, is really important. And that has just been taking opportunities as they've come, but also not saying yes to every opportunity as well. To protect both my time and my energy has been really important.
I can go next. I've had a variety of different experiences when it comes to the publication process. So my first co-authored published book chapter was when I was still working as a full-time practitioner as an assistant director of multicultural affairs in Texas. And that came from doing a series of presentations at ACPA. If folks probably know what that is, but the College Student Educators International, huge higher ed student affairs conference organization. And we were invited to write a piece in a book chapter. So that was kind of nice because someone like took the initiative to say, we want you to write a piece in this book on this topic, which was the academic outcomes of being involved in Latinx-based student organizations on college campuses. So that was a kind of seamless process per se, because people wanted us to to publish in their book. But I would also say that something that I've gotten used to over the last few years is rejection from publication, and being okay with rejection, right? Like, I think the first time I was a first year student working on a co-authored piece with a upperclassman in my PhD program, and he's like, yeah, our piece was rejected. And I was like, what does that mean? Like, that dude did not like the way we wrote it. Like, like what happened, right? But I didn't know that this was like normal. Like, rejection is normal in the academy, which is kind of sad. And I've had to like process, what does that mean for me, right? Working so hard to only be rejected over and over again in different capacities in the academy. But I've also gotten to the place of like, we did do really good work, and maybe that just wasn't a good fit for that specific journal, but there's others that really value what we're trying to say here. So let's look into those options, and then eventually get the pieces into other spaces, which ultimately, at the end of the day, I always feel like things happen for a reason, right? Like it was rejected because it didn't belong in that space, in that journal, and that piece didn't belong in that space. It belonged in a space that more practitioners are going to read, or more, or whatever. Community-based leaders are going to read. And so I've done, I've done it on my own. I've done it collaboratively with like how Alex shared with their experience. So yeah, I would say a lot of positives come out of it, but there was a lot of sad moments too of like, is my writing not enough? Like, and then it goes back to like being an imposter. Does rejection mean I don't deserve to be here, or don't deserve to be a writer? And what does it mean to be a scholar and a writer, right? Like I identify as a scholar, but I'm still learning when will my identity as a writer come into play, because I don't feel that currently. Although I have published pieces out there and people say great things, I don't feel it, right? So, and then when you get rejections, you really don't feel it. But I think being okay with rejection, sticking to why you decided to do that piece, and maybe it belongs in another space, has really helped me be okay with rejection these days.
Can I add one more thing too when thinking about the rejection piece? Once you submitted an article, is thinking about reviewers, and how sometimes throughout this process, as we talked about with the imposter syndrome, thinking about sometimes what the comments say, what the reviewers say, especially like the reviewer too, can really be that harsh person that will almost make you sometimes like take your computer and want to throw it, right? And so just thinking about you don't necessarily have to address everything that the reviewer suggests, and really standing your ground as to a reason as to why this is why I'm using Verdue, or this is why I'm using Black feminist thought, or something like that in your paper, and just remembering like what the work is for, like what my colleagues have mentioned before. One thing that I know I wanted to address too is thinking about we've talked a lot about publishing in journals, but almost like what does it mean to like publish or develop a book, right? So I've been on articles, but my real publishing experience, it came from being a co-editor in a book that recently just came out. And so what that experience was like for me, being a co-editor, as working with two other people, but also thinking about when someone asks you to write a book chapter, what does that mean? And how much responsibility that really is. So you invite people out to be an author in the book chapter, but also like as an editor, the responsibility for me, I learned a lot of reading and editing and why is this important, and just kind of going from there. So that's something that I also wanted to highlight with. I think that in comparing the two, from reviewing for a journal, but also reviewing for a book, I think I know that the reviewers for my book were a little bit nicer than what they have been for the journal. So I'm interested in seeing like, why is that? But so I just wanted to bring that point up too.
Jamila, do you want to do like a prideful plug for your new book?
Sure. Hold on. Let me get the book.
I got you, Jamila's right here, girl.
Shout out to our book for critical theory and qualitative data analysis and education. And we have 14 chapters in the book, but it's super amazing because we look at different ways to look at theory. My chapter looks at the experiences of Black women and the use of Twitter, with using the hashtag Black Women at Work, and how 150 characters can be used for qualitative data and not just quantitative data. So if you want to learn more about the process of like what it is to submit a book chapter and what all needs to go, feel free to message me privately.
I wanted to quickly add, I think that was a great segue because I know the specific question is about strategies for the publication process, but I also think it's incredibly important to become involved in the reviewing process as well. I think that a lot of review boards may not reflect a lot of the work that we may do. So it's important to get folks on review boards who know this work and are doing this work. So if journals such as the Journal for Critical Scholarship in Higher Education and Student Affairs is looking for review board members, it's a great opportunity to get involved and to be on the other side of that process to see like how you can provide feedback in a way that's nurturingly critical. Because I think that part is just as important as submitting to.
Awesome, wonderful plug. We are always looking for reviewers, so be on the lookout when we do our call for reviewers. So just a reminder, as we're getting towards the last third of the webinar, if you have any follow-up questions for the participants, please feel free to ask them in the chat function. In the meantime, we did have some sub-bullet questions that came up in regards to the publication process. And one of them is all about authorship. Something that we oftentimes don't talk about, but probably one of those things that we should be talking about. So I don't know if the panelists have any ideas about how is it that you've negotiated authorship, and a sub-bullet of that is how have you negotiated authorship with faculty members if you've written alongside faculty members in the past?
I can go. So I have two ways that we do it. So when I write with my group of colleagues, typically what we do is if it's the person's idea, then of course they go first, authorship. However, most recently what we started to do is whoever is up for graduation and getting ready to go on the job market, we often put that person as the first author, the first and second authors, and then we rotate from there. So that's one idea, which way we go. For the book that I can talk about that, my advisor, Dr. Rochelle Winkle-Wagner, is the first author because the concept of our book came from a class. And so it was a class that she taught first. And myself and my co-editor were actually in the class and we're also her advisees. And she invited us to be the co-editors for the book. So I would also say just have a conversation with the person that you're interested in co-writing with and seeing like where are their thoughts, because sometimes it's often where I've heard where people also like flip-flop. Okay, so you took the first lead on this, or who may be going up for tenure first, and I found that those types of relationships often work out the best.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jamila. I agree. I think that is it's a tough situation to be in for folks who don't like conflict, even if it's healthy conflict, because it could be nerve-wracking, especially as like a first or second year doc student and not knowing where your role is and what kind of power you have to have those type of conversations with faculty, right? I've gotten to the point where I'm just very transparent from the gate. And I'm just like, you know what? I don't have enough time because I'm on like 5 different projects right now. So how about I be fourth author? And what does that mean for me is that I'll do the theoretical frameworks and I'll do this part, right? So kind of giving myself boundaries and see if the team appreciates it or not, and we can negotiate that way. But in regards to working with faculty, like faculty advisors in particular, I think it's similar to Jamila's style, who's up for graduation sooner, probably needs to be a first or second author. But having conversations with my advisor, and then I guess I'm blessed again to have an advisor that's like really open, and although he himself is going up for tenure soon, he's open to like allowing his doctoral students to take first author. He doesn't always have to be first author, even if it's his projects, right? Because that's his mentorship style, right? Not just taking everything from the doc students, but making sure that he's providing what they need to be successful when they too go on the market and become, however you need to develop as a researcher or scholar practitioner. So having conversations of like, maybe in my third year, we can work on a project together where I'm first author and you're second author, right? But it all comes with conversation. And I think that's the hardest part, is like, it's easy to say, have that conversation with your faculty mentors or whoever's leading the research teams. But if you're not advocating for yourself, no one else is going to do it, probably. So I've learned that I had to just be transparent and say, you know what, these are my commitments right now, and I would love to do this project, but you know what, let me be third author. And this is what that means for me as third author, right? I also think that first author like manages the team for the most part, management process for whatever piece you're working on, and also takes a bulk of the load, right? I'm not about percentages, but thinking about that too, I don't think it's fair to be like a fourth author and you did 95% of the writing for that manuscript, right? I think that's unethical. So having conversations about like, what does that mean for first, second, third, and fourth author and the workload, which I think is really important, just to be transparent about that up front so people know what to expect moving forward, so that no one's disappointed at the end of the process, and have put so much time, energy, and work into it to only be told your last author, even though you did most of the work, right? So that's a little bit from me.
Thanks, Stefan. And I appreciate you talking about managing time and finding balance, because we just received a question from one of our attendees for all of you. For grad students who are constantly balancing so much between coursework and projects and thinking about research, what advice do you all have about setting up reading or writing schedules with your time, and how do you incorporate that into your schedules?
So I am not one of those people who writes every day. It's just not a practice that works for me. But I do have colleagues who it very much works for. So I think it's one about finding a practice that works well for you. And so the National Center for Faculty Diversity, for instance, will have like a 14-day writing challenge that I think is much more like, when I know it's going to have a start and an end date, works for me. Like writing the 10 minutes a day thing just doesn't work for me. But I do actually chunk out time in my calendar where I do dedicate to writing, and I actually will write the goals in the description of the calendar invite. And my rule is I'll never delete writing time, but I will be flexible about moving it. And so like if Antonio and I are working with our dear friend and colleague, Romeo Jackson, right now on a piece, and we have set some timelines throughout of what we're trying to do. And so I know that I have some edits to do to that piece. And so there's a 2-hour chunk in my calendar within the next week where I'm going to go in and edit that manuscript. And it might be Saturday morning, but I might need to move it to Saturday evening because of finals. But like, I'll never delete that 2-hour chunk. And that's my rule. Whenever I put writing on my calendars, I can't delete it. I have to move it, and move it meaningfully. It just can't be moved arbitrarily either. Which has been key for me.
I think for me, I'm all over the place, and I'm not a good example of someone that's writing regularly. I feel like I'm writing all the time, but I don't know what I'm writing. Maybe just emails. I don't know. But I would say something that helped me, especially doing the writing for my comprehensive exams, which was basically 3 large papers with 3 different questions that I had to answer. I reached out via social media to folks, whether that be one-on-one, and I put like a mass message on my like status of like, I need an accountability buddy, multiple accountability buddies this summer, because if I know that like I'm supposed to meet with Jamila from 10 to 11 on Wednesday, I'm going to be there, which is like dedicated time to write. So I did a lot of in-person writing sessions with folks that are in the area, but also a lot of virtual sessions with groups of folks and individual meetings with folks where we would just talk for like 5 minutes, how you doing, blah, 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 blah. Put a timer on, write for 50 minutes. When the timer went off, we would just talk for another 5 or 10 minutes, or take a bathroom break or whatever, and come back and write again for another 50 minutes. Because that was in my calendar scheduled, I don't like to, I think time is precious, right? And if I dedicated my time to someone else, I'm probably not going to cancel unless it's an emergency, right? So I'm already going to be there. It's dedicated time to writing. And I found that to be very helpful this past summer when I was writing up my comprehensive exam papers, having that accountability, those accountability partners really helped me. And I also, I don't know if different institutions do this, but our institution offers a 1-week dissertation boot camp where it's dedicated writing from 8 a.m. to like 4 or 5 p.m. And it was in the summertime for us. And I signed up for that again, so that way I have dedicated writing time that will force me to be in a space and focus specifically on the writing for my dissertation work. And at that time, that was for my comprehensive exam work and dissertation proposal. So those are some things that help me on a day-to-day. It varies, but that helped me during that time of my PhD process.
Something I really, really want to emphasize is to give yourself grace as well if you don't meet your deadlines, because there is no writing deadline that is more important than your well-being. So if you miss it, and hopefully you're a part of a collective that deeply cares about you, because you will have time, and to give yourself grace if you miss those deadlines. I think that has been really valuable for me as I've continued in this process, because things come up, life comes up. And there will always be work. But I think that it's really important that we're in this together and that we make sure we survive this process despite the deadlines.
Okay. With our remaining time, we want to ask a large question of, someone did submit a question of how do you go about pursuing a line of inquiry or research that has limited literature or scholars/researchers you can connect with. And if the panelists them individually can attest to that, we also want to leave this little bit of time for you to offer anything else that you've learned in your journey that you have not been able to share with the group.
Antonio, can you please repeat that question one more time?
Yes. The question was, how do you go about pursuing a line of inquiry or research topic that has limited literature or scholars/researchers you can connect with?
So I can go. I have experienced that with doing the research on looking at undergraduate women's and leadership. And so actually this came from my work and my line of inquiry, is that where I've been at a place where I was able to kind of create what is like a leadership model. And so that's something that you may not necessarily see coming from a graduate student, but I actually think that it's been really cool to kind of like test that model and see what it is. And then what I have begun to do is folks that I know that do work around like leadership, specifically around like like servant leadership or culturally relevant based leadership. I have been able to kind of bounce those ideas from them. And what I have been finding is that when I tell people like what my research interests are, they seem to know someone. And I'm like, when I was doing a search, I didn't find their name or information like that. And so I recently just sent an email to someone. I was like, oh, I heard about your research. I kind of skimmed your dissertation. Let's talk so I can kind of throw some ideas from you around my dissertation. And that has been very helpful for me. What I have found is that everyone wants to be helpful. And that has been really eye-opening for me, where it hasn't been seen as so much as like a competition to helpful, like, oh, well, maybe you should think about it in that sense. It also has given me insight on possibly attending another conference to present my work where scholars just focus straight up on leadership. So that's also a space for me to open up to present my work and get their ideas where I'm coming from an educational standpoint. And these folks may be coming from sociology or things of that nature. So, and what was the last part of the question?
Just limited literature or scholars/researchers you can connect with.
Yeah, so I would just do that. Just kind of do some general searching. Facebook and Twitter have been my go-to for a lot. And you'll be surprised how many times people will retweet what you write and people will start responding back to you. That's also a way if you don't feel like you're really good at like networking, to start connecting with people virtually.
I would say to add to that, I think Jamila hit it right on the spot. But to add to that, if you find one article that focuses on your topic, look at their references, right? Because I think a lot of times we forget that like they also had to find references, and folks that were also doing similar work. Look at those references and see if maybe that can be a starting point for you too. I started thinking about that more or less like last year, and I'm like, why don't I look at the reference list, right? Like, there's no articles on this, and I'm like, actually, there are articles. Just because I personally didn't find them doesn't mean other people weren't finding them, right? So utilize other people's reference lists as a guide too.
I mean, I think part of it is like trusting yourself also in doing this process, especially when no one has done the thing you've done. So I'm really interested in, for instance, in how white college students with a minoritized identity understand anti-racism, right? Like no, and there has been little to no empirical work aside from white women about that, right? And so part of it has been for me to spend my coursework as I've been able to apply it, looking at whiteness literature, and then looking at sort of these single access minoritized community understandings, and trying to piece that together myself to inform my study. So it's not going to be that there's going to be something out there that's exactly what you're doing. In fact, that's probably the reason you're doing what you're doing, is because of that gap per se. And so sometimes it's about you doing the groundwork in some way to establish the need. Like one of our professors here, Chris Ogren, would always say that lit reviews are about arguments. We don't make them sound like that, but your literature review should be an argument as to why you're doing what you're doing, rather than just saying, well, here's what the literature says. Well, you're also saying what the literature doesn't say, and that's the whole point of your study. And so thinking about how you sort of compile bodies of evidence that are adjacent to what you want to study can help provide the groundwork for what you do want to study.
Yeah, and I think it goes without saying too that higher education research is limited, and to make sure you're looking at other bodies of literature too. So I often look at research in Asian American studies, which has sometimes been much more insightful than research in higher education. So people are likely doing the work, just potentially not in education. So to make sure you're looking at those areas as well.
Well, we want to be mindful of your time and want to say thank you again to our wonderful panelists for joining us today. We are so grateful for the knowledge and wisdom that you've shared with all of us. I know I gained a lot from everything that you've shared, so thank you. For our attendees, I know we weren't able to get to all of your questions. We hope that there were things the panelists shared that will support you as you continue on in your journey and exploring research opportunities. We did record this webinar, so we will be sure to share that out through social media and with the attendees who asked us to share the link with them. But thank you again, Alex, Jamila, Stefan, and Vanessa. We appreciate your time, energies, and efforts. And thank you to our attendees for engaging with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.